Audit and Transparency and Overview and Scrutiny Committees. As we will be discussing post-Grenfell expenditure, please can we start with a 72-minute silence to... So it's 72 minutes, that'll be the end of the meeting. 72-second silence to remember the tragedy of Grenfell Tower. So we're in a slightly unusual situation of having two committees here together for an informal meeting, a private meeting held in public, where we will be asking if members of the public would like to ask questions as well. We have the Audit and Transparency Committee, which really should be called Audit, Transparency and Risk, because that's a better description of what we do and what we look at. Over the last year, we have been looking at the numbers, the finances involved in the post-Grenfell recovery expenditure. And as you can see, that makes up one of the reports in here. The other committee we have here is the OSC, and they are a scrutiny committee looking more at how that money is spent and the effectiveness of how that money is spent. Why are we here together? It was a joint meeting requested by me after discussing with my committee. We felt that we were looking at it from a very siloed point of view. We were just purely looking at the numbers and the money spent and where the money was going. We had no sight of how that money was spent or how effectively that money was spent, which of course is more the job of the OSC. Therefore, my suggestion to ensure and to add comfort to my committee members that nothing was falling between the gaps and that everything was being covered, that we have a joint meeting where we both see each other's reports and we have the ability to ask questions within that so that we can ensure that there are no gaps between the two. I'd like this to be a future-looking meeting as well. So we are here, and I think it has on the front of the report, members may wish to comment on the information provided and make recommendations about monitoring of impact and outcomes across the programme. So we're not only here to look at how the money was spent and to look at the effectiveness of how that money was spent, but also to see how we can improve things going forward. What would I like to get out of this meeting? And what do I think we should try and get out of this meeting? Comfort that we know what each committee is doing we're not trying to blur the lines. This is probably a once-off meeting where we can see both sides. The ability to ask questions, and I suppose from the audit and transparency's point of view, one of the now key parts of our external auditor signing off is not just whether the accounts are true and fair, but also in terms of value for money, which looks at the economy's effectiveness and what's the other E? Efficiency of our use of resources. And it does strike me that actually this gives us a good insight as an Audit and Transparency Committee as to how a considerable sum of money has been spent. In terms of the programme tonight, we have to finish by 7 o'clock because then we go into the Audit and Transparency Committee. We should take all three reports together and obviously take them as read. I'm going to start first by asking if there are members of the public who would like to ask questions. And if I may request you keep it to 5 minutes and make it question-based, and then myself and the officers will be taking notes of those questions to ensure that they are answered to the best of their ability. And then we'll go to questions from the various committee members. First of all, thank you very much to the officers for putting together these two reports. There's a lot of detail in there, there's a lot of work that's gone in there. Certainly in the Audit and Transparency Committee, it's a report that we have honed over time, over the last sort of 9 months. Whether we're happy or not that it is a finished report or finished reports is another question that we will no doubt get into today. But I think we've so far made very good progress. Members of the public, David, would you like to speak, or Kimia, would you like to speak first? Are you both going to speak?
If I can start.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you for allowing us to come and speak today. My first thought is, since this is a combined hearing, I will actually repeat some of the criticisms I made by email because I couldn't actually make the OSC committee meeting. But that was just to say that we still haven't had any answers to how people were able to attend physically to a lot of these activities that are listed in the attendance figures in the report submitted by Callum. And because there was a pandemic at the time most of this was on, yet there seemed to be 30, 40 people attending classes. I frankly find that unbelievable. I find most of the attendance figures for some of the groups not credible. So I would ask if there could be further explanation of how all that was accomplished during the pandemic. The other points I wanted to make come on the Audit and Transparency Committee and the value for money opinion. So in section 3.15, it talks about the culture change in the council. And they say there's going to be major changes, you see, because all of the things in the value for money opinion are things that are going to happen or in progress or may be happening, but there doesn't seem to be anything about things that have already happened, yet you've had 4.5 years to change the culture and the way the council do things. My personal opinion of scrutiny is that it has gotten worse since the changes happened in the scrutiny, that the scrutiny after the fire with the Grenfell scrutiny was actually something that worked and was quite a focused look at some of the way this was done, and the fact that that's now been spread across lots of different parts of the council has led to, I mean, for me personally, because I have an interest in it, has made it very difficult for us to follow and to track specific parts of that scrutiny, because there'll be in education or it'll be in social services or housing. So I don't know how that is for fellow councillors, but I don't think, I made these points to the scrutiny examiners when we talked to them as well, is that I don't think the new scrutiny system really works very well. And I'd also like to say that they talk in the report of the change makers. So who are these change makers in the council who will be transforming the culture of the council? Because what I've seen is that though the engagement, there's lots of that, there's lots of show, there isn't really any fundamental changes. And I think one of the problems you may have is that a lot of the people who were there before the fire or worked for the TMO are still here in place doing a lot of the functions in the council. And I think that's meant that the culture of the council itself hasn't really changed that much. I know the Chief Executive, Barry, was looking to do a culture change. He talked about there being problems with the culture before, but I haven't seen strong evidence in a lot of this of a fundamental significant change in the culture. I mean, for one example, and payments, a very specific question, is I asked about the prepaid card payments that are in the... I looked at the actual raw financial data to find most of them, but for example, in the 2020 quarter, you were paying £100,000 a month onto prepaid cards just through the general account, and that continued up to 2022. And I've asked Callum what those payments were for and why so much money, because there's a significant fraud risk, as you know, through putting money on prepaid cards. It's quite untraceable. I've still not had any answer on that, so I'd like to repeat the question, what are those payments for? Because I noticed from the reports that that's still in progress. So again, I find it amazing that they are preparing to sign off the accounts for 2016-17 and 2017-18, yet half the reports aren't finished. And I don't see how they can give an opinion. I mean, they've already given the opinion that the council did not have value for money in those 2 years, but I don't see how any different opinion could be given by Grant Thornton.
Thank you. Kimia.
Thank you. I'm Kimia Zabian. I'm advocate for Grenfell next of kin. We have had meetings with Secretary of State and the Home Secretary and Barry Quirk when a significant number of the next of kin have been in the room, identified themselves and being counted, and that's all that counts as far as we're concerned. I'm their advocate, so when you attack me, you're attacking them. At the moment, there are 34 of the 72 deceased, and the Grenfell next of kin is recognised by the state as a legitimate group. So first of all, I'd like to say, can you please stop intimidating and attacking me personally, because you're attacking them. Secondly, the question is that nothing in here is really any different from anything that we've been going over and over and over again for 2 years. You've just basically burying people in lots of paperwork and repeating exactly the same thing over and over again. The questions are not answered at all. There's no breakdown of actually what this money was spent on. And in fact, in between the lines, it says, look, we know that we can't answer these questions. In fact, referring back to Robin Fairman, who said in OSC 2 years ago, the problem is we can't explain where the money has been spent, and that's our problem. And then the reports talk about lots of ings. There's lots of ings. We will be monitoring, we will be checking, we'll be consulting, we are willing, we are engaging. Everything is about how going forward, everything is going to be much better. But meanwhile, the meter is ticking, and whilst this report says that it's £22 million spent from the dedicated service up until March 2021, bear in mind, we are now almost near the end of that financial year, so actually the figures we're looking at is £32 million that is unaccounted for. Furthermore, the whole value for money part, which is a very significant part, which is being minimized in this, because anything to do with public money, you have to have the VFM. You can't just say, we had £5 in and £5 out. You have to be able to show that. So you can't minimize that part of it. The VFM part is very significant, and I feel that it's being kind of obfuscated here with the promise that things are going to be clearer. My questions are, there is a bit in this which says that the figures of the satisfaction surveys from people about how wonderful the dedicated service is very high. It's, I think, 86%. But I want to know, did you actually tell people how much that DS is costing? Because if I go into a pizza parlor and I have a delicious pizza, I can say is marvellous, but if I get a bill for £10,000 for that pizza, I might have a different opinion about that pizza. So you're not being honest with people, officers, because you're designing these surveys without telling people actually what the true cost of it is to them, and how much the whole system is costing. So that's number one. Did you tell them what the cost was for the DS? And what is the definition of trusted partners? You used to call them preferred partners, now you're calling them trusted partners. But what is the definition of that? What is the measure of that? Because of course a lot of these partnerships received funding to the tune of millions of pounds, and they were started from scratch. So how were they trusted to begin with and continue to be trusted when they can't actually prove what they did with the money that they were trusted with? Also, I've got questions for Anne Siren and Tunde and the whole engagement team, because it seems remarkable to me that you have councillors who are supposed to be in charge of community and engagement, and they actually deliberately stay away from certain people, including the next of kin, and also several officers who make phone calls to people telling them, don't cooperate, don't talk to, that your funding will come to an end if you collaborate or cooperate with next of kin. And these are the conversations that are happening on the ground. So I'm afraid that, I almost couldn't be bothered to come here tonight after this. You've got to bear in mind, I'm an advocate, very committed, but I am a volunteer. I don't get paid to do this stuff. They get paid to do this, to convince you that what they're doing is value for money, and it ain't. And that's why no one's prepared to sign off on it. Now that's a problem for this council.
Thank you very much. So just distilling the questions, and I think we should answer these first before we go to the committee's questions. So first question really is how could people attend physically during the pandemic? Then we've got a question on VFM, and in particular the scrutiny committees and how we can endeavour to improve scrutiny. The culture change. I'd be interested to know what the sort of turnover of staff is from pre the Grenfell tragedy to now. I should think it's probably quite significant. Question on the prepaid cards. There is a report in the next meeting that we are going to be looking at. I don't know whether you had sight of that. So it is in the Audit and Transparency report, and we will be discussing that there. It is something the committee have picked up on and wanted to know more on. And then in terms of the surveys, did we inform the people being surveyed how much the service was costing? Perhaps, Callum, I assume that's yours. Perhaps you can elaborate on the work you're doing with internal audit in terms of the improvement of those surveys going forward. And then the definition of trusted partners. Who would like to lead off?
I'm happy to, Councillor, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to David and Kimia for those helpful questions. And nice to see you this evening. If starting with some of David's questions, initially, how are people able to access physically and online, well, physically during the pandemic? I think partly the impact report sets out a number of different services and activity throughout the whole of the course of the last few years. Some of those services were facilitated by being able to people move quickly online. Not all of them though, some of them. specifically some of the more therapeutic forms of support, were able to provide support quite quickly by continuing to be able to work in schools and in school-based settings. So because schools were able to operate apart from the time when schools were closed, the therapists were working in schools at the same time. For when people moved online, lots of therapists sent out packs essentially to kids so that they could continue their activity. So I can very much appreciate the question and I can see where you're coming from, but there is a good degree of scrutiny on the validity of the statistics and the performance data that we have. It's provided by providers, it's that which is checked directly by the commissioners, and then there is a sort of checking process and a validity check that happens with my team in terms of just sense checking the plausibility of that data. So hopefully that gives you a bit more assurance onto that. Or not? Do you want to? I can keep going.
Yeah, I think keep going. We don't really want to start a sort of discussion, a dialogue.
Fine. In terms of prepaid card payments, that is specifically for bereaved survivors, which is why you may not have heard direct detail about it. So, but it's been set out in papers, so there's no problem repeating it here. So, as part of a dedicated service, individual bereaved survivors are entitled to what we call individual services, which are budgets, much like personal budgets and how they work in adult social care. And bereaved survivors basically are able to utilise them through the mechanism of prepaid cards. They are named. No, it's not. All prepaid cards are named. People have to sign an understanding of their address. There is clarity in the sense that there is clear information in the sense that people are aware that the prepaid card system works in a very different way to how it worked when prepaid cards were given in the early days. Prepaid cards are provided, as I say, in people's name. They sign documentation understanding that the council has access to review the accounts, and essentially what we do is someone requests an individual service. As long as it complies with our commissioning policy and their support plan, money is loaded onto their card and they're able to spend that in accordance with their request. And I have officers whose job it is then to go through the accounts and to check that the money is being spent appropriately. If the money is not being spent appropriately or looks like it hasn't been spent appropriately, conversations are then had, and there's a 4-stage process to mitigate any of that risk. Because of the history of prepaid cards in the Grenfell response, we have had a thorough audit of it, and I don't know if this is predetermining a paper that's coming, but we got a satisfactory assurance that the right systems and controls are in place to ensure that that system works effectively. So you will see sums of £100,000 or so going into the accounts, because basically how prepaid cards work is we load money into PFS, and PFS hold a wallet, and from the wallet each individual person is then able to load money onto their cards. So that's how that works.
Okay.
In terms of the scrutiny challenges, I'm not sure necessarily I'm best placed to answer that, but I can say that having taken papers through the Grenfell Recovery Scrutiny Committee, I can see the difference, but at the same time, we do go to lots of different scrutiny committees now to try and make sure each of the different parts of the systems of the Grenfell programme are properly scrutinised. So it feels like more scrutiny than less, but it's for others to determine how effective that is.
Okay.
I don't know if Councillor...
Sorry, MT.
Yeah, if I could just say something, David, about scrutiny. What you've said about the Grenfell Scrutiny Committee, a lot of people have said. I myself, I was mayor at the time, so I have never attended the Grenfell Scrutiny Committees as it was. And you say that it was easier to have everything in one place, and I see the logic of that. But I have heard also from other people that those meetings were very difficult in how they were, and therefore not a great deal of actual scrutiny took place. I mean, I know that when we got rid of it, the Labour Party did not participate in scrutiny for a year, which was a great loss to us. But, now they're back, and I'm very glad they are back. But I have to say, the idea of introducing a slightly new system of scrutiny was meant to improve how scrutiny took place, and that was the idea. I think sometimes people don't always understand exactly what we do in scrutiny, in that we hold the executive to account and we amplify the voice and concerns of residents. But we don't take decisions, so we only have the power of recommendation. And I do understand it's frustrating if people come, you know, and you yourself have come to many of my committees, and, you know, I'm very grateful for the input that you have put into those committees. But they don't always necessarily, the things that are said in committee do not always necessarily directly translate into action. But at all of the so-called select committees and the overview and scrutiny committee now, people are always allowed to speak. And that has been made clear, so that, you know, no one is going to be turned away or not allowed to ask a question or anything like that. The other thing is we are now beginning to chart the recommendations that we have made. So we're going to have an overall tracker, and the scrutiny team are working very hard to do that. So all the recommendations that have come out from the various scrutiny committees will be put onto a big table, and then we'll be able to tick them off when they have sort of been implemented. I have to say that the leadership team doesn't have to accept our recommendations, that we cannot commit the council to any form of expenditure. But more and more, the leadership team are actually taking up our recommendations. And like I say, we are now beginning to track. So hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate eventually, you know, exactly what scrutiny can achieve. So that's all I have to say. So I hope that helps. But thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then just picking up from David's last question about change makers and culture change. David, you mentioned a 3.15, and I think I've checked our papers and I can't see what you're referring to, so I think that might be about one of the papers that's coming in the following meeting, so which is sort of outside of... fine.
Okay.
Do you want to do that?
I'll take some of that. I mean,
yes,
I think 3.15 is simply saying that while the council has made changes, there are still changes in progress, and that culture change takes a long while. So it's an acknowledgement to some extent of what you're saying. I don't think it's intended to say that changes haven't been made. It's intended, well, I know it's intended to say that we are still in the process of making change in the culture of the council. And some of that is through change makers who are officers of the council. So we're trying to make changes at all levels of the council rather than just a top-down process of changing the management of the council, but making the whole culture of the council changed. So that's what that paragraph is about. I think you also asked about the VFM comments that were made and how KPMG were able to make that. Well, they obviously have given an adverse opinion, so they are saying that the council wasn't providing value for money in its management of the tenant management organisation. So that's the opinion that they're able to express from what's happened so far in the inquiry. Grant Thornton GT will be evaluating the value for money in the years that now follow on from that, but we don't know what conclusion they'll reach obviously yet, so we can't really comment on that. We'll be able to comment on that when they've reached their conclusions. Well, they can't start until this report's been agreed, and that's why it is actually important that this report's, you know, that KPMG have reached a conclusion, because it now enables GT to do their work on that, and to reach their own conclusions. So I think it is a good thing that KPMG have been able to reach a conclusion, because it does enable the conclusions to be reached for the years that follow. But it will take them, they're not here at the moment to say how long it will take, but it will take them, and they've done quite a lot of the work, but they will take some time, won't be immediate.
There was one last point I wanted to make just on that, and it was that it says in the report that there is one last objection to be answered, and it doesn't say what it is. So I just wondered, what is the remaining objection to?
To the value for money?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you, I'm not sure with Mike.
No, there was one outstanding objection that is kind of linked to the fact that they weren't able to respond to that objection because it was effectively about the same thing. So they're now in the process of responding to that objection, and we'll be able to report on that when they probably at the next committee, the next audit committee.
So 4.5 years on, there's no value for money, the meter's ticking, things are going to get better, and no one really knows who's responsible for what, no one's able to sign off, and yet we're told that there's huge satisfaction from the victims. Seems to me like this council has got a blank check.
Kimmy, if I may, we did give you time to talk.
Yes.
We've got to get on to the committee members' questions, if we may.
Please do. I think I should just go home, because I don't think you're willing to really answer any questions.
Thank you very much.
We need outside auditors. Please, can you ask for outside auditors, someone independent to come in, go through these records and tell us where the money's gone? Because otherwise this council's been benefiting. This council's been benefiting from this tragedy by getting a blank check.
Okay, thank you. So one just further point on the surveys, Callum, and it does come up with internal audit in terms of, I believe you are working with them on future surveys and how to improve them going forward. You'd be able to elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, of course. Yes, so we are working with Audit at the moment, who are simultaneously reviewing the effectiveness of the survey that we've undertaken as part of the dedicated service review, so that we can make sure we learn any lessons and can strengthen the process if there's areas for us to strengthen. Kimmy asked a question about whether we'd declared in the survey itself exactly how much the service cost. We didn't in the survey, but we have done, and we've published lots of information about how much the service costs. We've sent that to bereaved survivors. It's been published on the website. So I think it's fair to say that people are aware of how much the services cost. If I can build on that slightly, there was a figure quoted that 22 million to date has been spent on the dedicated service, and really that's 32 million. Those figures are completely incorrect. So we haven't even spent that amount of money on the whole recovery programme. So the annual budget for the dedicated service is 4.5 million. So probably to date we haven't ever spent all of that budget, because bereaved survivors have been keen for us to put money aside. So I would say to date we're probably closer to about 12 million on the dedicated service. So it's significantly different, and it's important we're clear on the facts.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's our list of questions from the public, so perhaps we can go to committee members. And we're going to do this. Hands up first from the back row, Councillor Hammond.
Thanks very much, Chair. And my question, I think, will go to Callum, and to say thank you very much for the paper, and I'm sorry I missed the discussion on it at the 11th of November OSC meeting when I had the cold that couldn't be shaken off. But the report that you've produced today suggests that you made some significant changes to the report as a result of the discussion at the OSC on the 11th of November. And I'm just wondering if you could perhaps outline a few headlines of what you took away from that discussion, please, in summary form.
Yeah, of course, but I have to say, Councillor, thank you for your question, but I have to say that I'm not sure I follow. This is exactly the same paper that we've published and brought to the OSC that we've taken here, so apologies if we've said anything that's caused confusion.
Oh, right, okay. Well, I didn't notice much, but but the paragraph 1.5 says the framework is informed by conversations with residents, colleagues, partners and other key stakeholders and incorporates comments and feedback from the OSC, which considered an early draft of the framework at its meeting on the 12th of November, by which I assume you mean the 11th of November.
If I'm turning the thing.
So that suggests that there were some changes made as a result of that discussion?
I think that was the year before.
It's I think the paper you're looking at there is the resourcing framework.
Okay, so I've got the wrong paper. My apologies then.
No, it's the problem of having lots of long papers, which is our fault.
Right, okay. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bakhtir.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions. One of them, in the key outcomes, we say, in the report, you say, providing tailored support for bereaved and survivors. We had a survivor and bereaved addressing the council in July, and he came 11 days ago, addressed us again. And I didn't feel anything tailored to suit him and his family or some families. And my second question is about employment. You have spent a lot of money in your department. Can you tell us now, I asked the same question 11 days ago, do you have figures how many people we have managed to put into employment or train and find them jobs? Because this is the best thing to do, to put people, give people's life employment. And the table I am looking at is dedicated service 21-22. 1.653 is million, 1,653,000 is spent on frontline and support team. This is almost half of 4,000 or 3,800, almost. Can you tell us the rest of the money, how you spend the rest of the money, services? Give us a few examples, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. So answering your questions as they came. So we do, I was obviously present at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting on the 11th of November and was struck by the gentleman's presentation and his articulation and desire for more choice and control. He is an individual I know well, he's part of our steering group and I speak to him on a regular basis. But I can agree that how he spoke would convey, I can understand how it would convey the fact that we've got a long way still to go. And I think that over the course of the last couple of years we have strengthened and done more and more to try and provide more personalisation, more tailoring, more choice and control. Examples for that are entirely how the workers actually work, the work that they do for an individual when they're in need. Although we support 700 plus people, they've all had a shared experience. Their specific experience of that overarching tragedy is different, and therefore the support we try and provide is hyper-personalised. And without going into the detail of individual cases, that could be anything from, as you point out in your second question, supporting someone back into work. It can be providing relationship counselling for people whose relationship is on the rocks. It can be about providing support to children and young people. So we do provide support there, and the individual services that we provide is essentially a direct personal budget that people can use exactly as they see fit. The areas of growth that we're trying to develop here as well is both around our commission services. So at the moment we spend £550,000 on centrally commissioned services that are anything from ESOL classes to employment services to gym memberships, things that bereaved survivors have told us are important to them. But what we're looking to do as part of the implementation of the review that we've just completed is to adapt that budget and essentially personalise the budget so people can use it. They don't have to use the services and the providers that we've commissioned, instead that they can use the money to purchase support from an organisation that's local to them, that's relevant to them culturally and relevant to them in terms of their needs. So we're definitely on a journey, and as the gentleman pointed out, it's definitely not completed. In terms of the employment and training figures, that's my apologies that we haven't got that ready for you to date, but we are working on it. We've been preparing a few other reports that are coming to leadership at the moment, so I'll make sure we get that to you by next week. And apologies that you haven't, apologies that we haven't got that here to you today. And in terms of the funds, there is, I can't remember which paper it's in now, it's my turn. In one of the papers in the appendix, we've got a breakdown of the dedicated service budget as is at the moment. I think it's in appendix table 1, page 23 of the finance report. So overall appendix 2, is it? And that sets out in a bit more detail all of the different services and the way the budget breaks down. In terms of, you asked about the services that we commission, and I guess I've touched on it already. Commission services, as I say, educational, we've got digital skills, training based, physical and health and wellbeing based. So we pay for alternative therapy and other forms. Individual services pretty much is very, very broad what bereavement survivors can use the money on. They can't use the money to pay for regular bills or food or anything else, but so there's about 5 or 6 conditions that the money can't be spent on, but anything else it can be spent on as long as it aligns to their personal support plan, which is why support plans are so important to us. And I think probably that answers your question, hopefully.
Thank you. I'm quite keen to get into some sort of cross-committee questions. And hence I'm going to give preference to my co-opted members of the Audit and Transparency first. But before we do that, because this is opportunity for Audit and Transparency Committee members to ask about aspects of OSC and vice versa. And, you know, really before you ask your sort of questions, has this exercise been useful? Has having both reports painted a fuller picture of where the money's gone and how it's been spent, and sort of brings a bit of life to the numbers? What, Cosette, hands up first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The observation I would make is that, yes, it is useful, but there's a timing mismatch on the information. Having some information from earlier in the year and some relatively recent makes it difficult to knit together a current end-to-end view. So it would be helpful if we were to do something like this again in future, if we had something that was entirely updated from end to end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew?
Yes, Ian. Well, thank you for arranging this, because I think it is helpful in one respect. It is worrying in another respect, because the more information you get, the more questions you have. And if you think about our discipline in terms of audit and finance, we're looking for things to cross-check always. And so it is actually quite difficult, I think, to cross-check what we saw as the summary numbers to the qualitative statements in the papers for this joint meeting. But I think it's to be encouraged that we continue to work in this way, because working in two silos, I just don't think is satisfactory. That's the first observation. The second observation is that it is always concerning, isn't it, when you have members of the public come with particular issues and they're expressed quite stridently, and it's difficult to tell whether what they're saying is really representative of the wider community or not. It's very easy to be swayed by the two people that are in the room. So I'm left with a sort of question in my mind: if they are representative of the wider community, we do seem to be talking at cross purposes with each other. They're making statements, we're making statements back, but there isn't a dialogue flowing. Perhaps this isn't the environment that we would have a dialogue flowing, but I'm concerned that the lady who spoke, she made a number of points. I think I didn't sense any reply that was given was moving her opinion at all. And I think that is concerning. Although, Councillor Rossi, what you said, I followed, and it was all very logical, but there didn't seem to be any acceptance of there was progress and there was things to work with to go forward. So I think I'm concerned to hear those two views, but I don't have the context of how representative they are of the wider community. And indeed, I don't have the knowledge to know whether these are the 4 current issues and that 24 other issues have been raised and have been cleared away. I sense not, because there were some very, striking statements about you're not listening, and we're not making progress, we're going backwards. Those sorts of comments. I guess I'm left wondering. What am I left wondering? I don't know what more can be done and is worthwhile to do on looking backwards. Because you only look backwards, the only benefit to me is looking backwards, because that's been money spent and actions taken if it informs you about what changes and refinements you might make going forward. And I'm a bit concerned we're sort of digging our heels in, just trying to look 2, 3 years, 4 years ago, and we're getting less and less benefit from that dialogue, whereas you introduced the meeting, which was about looking forward, and I think that is exactly the right thing to do, to look forward. And lastly, I had the opportunity to speak to one of the officers this morning, and I guess my main concern really boils down to what more can be done to show that the money that has been spent in this past has been spent, the words I wrote down, are appropriately, efficiently, effectively, to actually get the community behind the project. And I know we're looking at a paper in our next meeting as to what further work can be done, but it does seem we're at quite a critical point in deciding what can be done, and if it can be done, is it worthwhile? And indeed, now listening to 2 members of the public, is it going to make a jot of difference anyway? I think the lady did say she wanted external audit, but I don't know what she didn't know really what she wanted from external audit. I think she wants to hear that the money has been spent in an appropriate, efficient and effective way. But I think in our discussions, we know that's virtually impossible to get somebody outside the organisation to help make that, or make a conclusion which we can use as external validation. So, a number of thoughts. Thank you for preparing all this extra information for me as a member of the Audit and Transparency Committee, but it hasn't probably put me into the reassured category. And I think we've got some difficult decisions to make.
Just to comment on that, going through these 2 reports has made me realise how lucky we are on the Audit and Transparency Committee, because it's so black and white. It's numbers, it's are they accounted for properly, have they gone in the right place, you know, is it right or wrong, is it true or fair? And the OSC as a scrutiny committee, it's so much more intangible than that. But I think what everybody is, I think one of the sources of the frustration is the inability to measure the successes of how the money has been spent. But I've been thinking about that all day, and I don't know. It's so hard to do. You can do surveys where 86% say they're very happy with the service, or you can have anecdotal evidence from people who come and speak to us saying they're not happy with it, or it's been misspent. It's a very difficult conundrum. Any suggestions on that, Andrew?
One thing, it just strikes me, one simple word which we'll all understand, I think. It's trying to build the trust, isn't it? Because without that trust, we're going to be hampered going forward. And I agree, I don't have the answers as to how to build the trust of the community that we're trying to help.
Okay. Oh, Liz. Next.
May I make just one comment just to build on what you said? Thank you for your patience. In reflecting on appropriate, efficient, and effective, and that backwards glance and that forward view, we really are at a turning point because, as we heard earlier, efficient and effective ties more towards the value for money proposition, which we already know isn't there. And when you think about it, and you think about the extraordinary and very tragic circumstances that led to these things in the first place, at the time it was really about helping people. And sometimes, perhaps, we didn't get it done in the most efficient and effective way possible because it was a unique and extraordinary, horrific situation. And we were all doing our very best to be responsive to give the community support. But now is that pivot point of looking forward. And this is the right time to be really thinking about the question holistically. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think this has been a useful exercise, and I think it's great that we work together, and I'm very appreciative of all the work that's gone on into this. But I did find it difficult to pull the reports together. As Cosette has already said, they are at different dates. One's at May, the other one's at November. And we also, as the Audit and Transparency Committee, when we arrived at the May meeting, we had a very helpful schedule which pulled all the expenditure together. And that was exceedingly helpful in terms of seeing where the money had been spent. But it hasn't been presented in this pack. And we also had quite a detailed follow-up report in July that we asked for, and that was very helpful as well. So I think something more needs to be done to pull these things together going forward. The other thing that I was a bit concerned about, I appreciate you can't make people respond to surveys, but throughout the reports we seem to sort of say that the dedicated service is the positive feedback and the majority value the support. But when you actually look at the detail of the figures, we're only getting response from 40% of the people who actually use that service, and yet we're concluding in other reports that this is all working well. So we do need to, and what was it, the table on page 16 of Appendix 3 actually puts quite high percentages of people that were supporting this, but it's a very low percentage of response. So I think we need to make sure that that's addressed going forward. And the other thing that I'm concerned about, because we do need to look forward, but these reports only go to March 2024. That's 2.25 years away. I haven't seen any figures as to what is proposed after that date, and that does give me rise for good cause for concern.
Yeah, would anyone like to respond to that? I mean, firstly, the aligning of the dates. Let's go back. I found this very useful, having both reports together. I think we're going to have to do it again. And hence, when we need working together from the officers' teams in terms of aligning the data points. I mean, I'd love to say financial year end because I'm an accountant, but whatever the date is, to have the reports aligned would be very useful. Yeah, if we pulled all the packs that we've gone through in here, it would be a very, very meaty document. Perhaps that should be compiled and distilled. And then, yeah, I understand your feedback on the surveys and everything like that. And as I said, the internal audit team are working with Callum and his team in trying to improve the 40% uptake of people who respond, to improve that. Taryn, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. If I could just come back, so on the previous reports that came to the audit committee, so we had one in May and then we had a follow-on that came in July, which gave a bit more of a detailed information. And you're right, we did table something in May, so on reflection we should have included the summary that we provided there. The only thing I would say that, or one of the reasons why we didn't include, so the reports were included as they were presented to the audit committee at that time. There's been no changes since. I think the main reason for not necessarily including the July one was because the impact report that we're looking at tonight, which obviously Joe and Callum are the authors of, is mainly around the Grenfell recovery strategy. So from 2019 onwards, the more detail that went into the July report was really breaking down the first 2 years of the council's response in a bit more detail. There wasn't anything new in relation to the breakdown of the spend, but I agree. Maybe it would have been more helpful had we put the complete pack together. Absolutely on the timescales. I think it's just the nature of how we've looked at some of this over the last 6 months, but we can certainly take that away and just going forward. And I'm sure Callum will say a bit more about post 2024, but also forward reporting into Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and how can we maybe align some of the finance information with the report at the same time.
Callum.
Yeah, and if I can just build on that, thanks, Taryn. I think what we've committed to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is that we'd have an annual impact report, and taking your feedback on, there's no reason why we couldn't, at the same time as we publish that paper, have a financial section on the year that the impact report covers going forwards. And hopefully
Sorry, Callum, when did you say the annual impact report would be?
So the paper that was originally taken to OSC, which I think is Appendix 2 of the papers we have here, is the first of a series of annual impact reports that we've committed. So we've made a commitment that each autumn into sort of November, we'll be able to produce a impact report looking at the year previous, mainly, and a little bit on the 6 months in between the end of the financial year and the date of the publication. And what I'm suggesting at the moment, it doesn't have any financial information in it. And what I'm suggesting is going forward, so starting from next year's annual impact report, we could include the relevant financial information for that year, so that in one paper, both committees would be able to hopefully have the information needed to be able to make a better judgment.
My only concern about that is that's 12 months off.
Yeah.
12 months, we're going to be in November 2022, and as Liz has pointed out, as per the document, the money's running out in 2024. So should we do it twice a year? But I'm overstepping my brief and moving into other committees. May I ask the other chair for her opinion?
Just to come in on what I think is the main point, the thing that worries me the most is what happens in March 2024. And I know we can look back and say, well, the money wasn't spent right here, but whatever, but actually, to me, the really important thing is looking forward and seeing where we're going to go. I mean, I actually think that a yearly report is okay, but that doesn't mean that nothing happens in between. So, you know, I think that these things have to be looked at continually, and they do certainly come to OSC on a regular basis. But an actual report, I think they probably take so long to write that once a year is probably just about, you don't want to by nasal, by sort of assessing yourself, you don't want to kind of interrupt the work that you're doing. So I think there has to be a balance, if that makes sense.
Maybe that balances the data rather than a whole mid-year written report. It's just keeping the data consistent.
Yeah, I think we can, Joe and I were just talking, I think in the interim between now and what I'm suggesting in next November, we could definitely look at having a summary at the end of the financial year, looking back at this financial year just gone as well. So you had something in a few months and then something more sort of concrete in our governance sort of process. And
more on data rather than words.
Well, definitely on data and figures, but you know, you do need to explain the figures to help them have context.
I'm just trying to save you.
No, we like writing.
It's okay.
And if I may just build on some of the other points, I think you know, we recognise that 40% of bereavement survivors means that there's 60% of people who didn't respond. But I think at the same time, within a council setting and considering the context, if you like, of bereavement survivors accessing recovery-based support from a council that many of them feel is implicated in what's going on. You know, we also felt incredibly privileged to have that number of people who responded. If you look back at the surveys that we've done over time, the first time we had a much smaller figure. We did one in January about the future of the building that we got more like 20%, and so we are on the right trajectory in terms of getting the figures up, but really importantly, the data that we can rely on isn't purely just from the survey. So we have support plan review data that each bereavement survivor does on a 3 or 4 monthly basis. We get audits that we do on a monthly basis that managers do and call up individual bereavement survivors. So our understanding of how people are experiencing and feeling from the service. The survey was the biggest individual sort of collective process, but it's very much only one part of the picture of the data we've been managing to gather over the last few years.
Thank you. Andrew, do you have a further point?
Sorry.
Charles
ought to speak. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Emma, Councillor Dencode.
Thank you.
Go for it. We're looking for concise cross-committee questions.
I'll ask the questions I've written down. Thank you, Chair, because I have spent a long time reading this, and if it hadn't been for community members and myself pestering, maybe we wouldn't have been here. And first off, I just want to say I don't think we should be here. I don't think we should be having to reknit a situation that we have created ourselves badly. I'm sorry, but if Grenfell Scrutiny Committee wasn't going to continue, we need one person who's politically accountable for the whole strategy, and that is what we don't have, because people don't seem to know who should be in charge of it. Who is in charge politically? I don't know who is in charge. Who is in charge of the overview of what is going on with all the Grenfell issues? And I know that the meetings were difficult, but that's because people were frustrated. So I just want to say, I don't think we should be here and saying, oh, this committee is doing that and that. And, from the first task force, and I will make these comments, sorry, Chair, from the first task force report, they complained about silo working, and we have recreated silo working by splitting up that committee, and I think we've made it more complicated for ourselves unnecessarily. Where are we? And as community members, we're talking about all the ings. I think it's really depressing, actually, that we are still working towards monitoring all the rest of it. We should be way ahead of all of this. All of these things came up. Am I the only person who reads the task force reports and the scrutiny and governance, all the rest of it, have repeated over and over again the same things? And we seem to be stuck in a bit of a loop, making the same mistakes and getting the same results, which are imperfect. And then we have to hunt for the information, which is making everybody frustrated. And if people can't find the information that they need, and it's not in the North Kent News, which is really not worth reading, and if you can find it on the website, I'll give you a gold star. It's almost impossible to find anything. So the whole, there are a lot of issues going on. The silo working, engagement, I think we're wasting a lot of money on engagement, and we are still not prepared to actually, and this phrase worries me, and this is in the December 2020 one, which I've just reread, that residents would like a greater sense of ownership over elements of the programme, etc. They don't want a greater sense of ownership. They want ownership. It's different. So the tone of this is, well, we're going to give them a little bit of this and then pull back. I think we've got a huge problem there, and people will continue to be frustrated because we're not dealing with people straight. And that trust won't come unless we deal with people straight and actually hand over more of what we're doing rather than just letting them engage a bit. So I honestly think we've got problems as for, trying to work out whether or not money has been spent, whether that's been value for money. That's obviously something we have to continually look at. We shouldn't have to do this just once a year. That should be ongoing, but as I say, I don't know who is politically accountable for Grenfell strategy, spending and so on. There's not one person, and if it's been split into 3 or 4 committees, this is our problem, actually. It is a problem.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you very much. My questions are short and quite sort of focused. I mean, looking at some of the criticisms and concerns we've heard, Firstly, about the prepayment cards. I mean, so I see them, this is an attempt to give people control, but are the appropriate officers able to see where each payment goes, who the payee is?
Callum.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes.
Right, okay, that's it. Turning now to the dedicated service, and specifically the dedicated service workers, I mean, I think the question is this an organisation that is too fat? I mean, I ask that without a view one way or the other, but I mean, has that question been tested? I mean, one of the challenges obviously in doing so is that it's different to what we or other people are doing elsewhere. So the question, one answer might be, I mean, how is the management, is the structure quite a flat pyramid? Not how many people, chain levels of management are there between Callum and the dedicated service workers themselves?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the general perspective on dedicated service workers, their caseloads are significantly higher than the normal social care caseloads in the borough. They do a lot of work in terms of the actual number of families they support and the range of issues. If it gives you a sense, before when we had the key work service, we had about 60 or 70 workers. We now have about 16 or 17. Acknowledging that the key work service was supporting the wider community as well, but the majority of them were bereaved survivors. So we have trimmed down the numbers significantly. In 2019 to 2020, the service was set up in 2019. We, following feedback from bereaved survivors on our own reflection, we halved the management cost, and there now is 3 layers between me and a frontline dedicated service worker.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a fitting meeting, and I do appreciate for you taking the time to organize and to get to this joint meeting. It's the first time that I attend a joint meeting with Audit and Transparency. As the Chair of Housing and Communities, we do deal with Grenfell issues, but again, as Councillor Imogen Court has mentioned, the division of the issue related to Grenfell has caused a great deal of stress, and I'm sure everyone appreciates, and especially what we have heard from the members of the public, I can understand and sympathize with them. Just to go back to what we have seen in the report, on Appendix 2, page 2, 2.2 million pounds has been used so far for the midway, and 22 million pounds has been used so far, and 28 million pounds is planned to be used for the next 3 years. And then again, the money that will be used on the same Appendix 2, page 6, will be used for dedicated services, ongoing target support, Grenfell community program. All of the above issues that I've just mentioned and the report mentions in page 2 and page 6 have all in common Grenfell. And because of that, I think it's important for us to understand the need for where we have, as a scrutiny team or as scrutiny, have got it wrong. This current system of scrutiny we have, it's improving and it's ongoing. However, what we did not do and deliver is when we divided Grenfell issue. I understand it was it wasn't easy. I was a member of Grenfell Scrutiny Committee, and no one can tell me the experience because I was in it, I was part of the committee, and it was not something you wish to be part of at the time, but we have to be there for the people who have been affected by the trauma and Grenfell issue. Again, this is a good joint meeting, but it's a one-off meeting, and the information we have received today, it's overwhelming. I think it will be good for a dedicated group or a committee or selective committee to deal with from the beginning. My fear is, after 5 years of this tragedy, same questions will be asked, the money that has been spent. We did not enjoy Grenfell Scrutiny Committee, but we had to do it for the sake of the council, for the sake of our members and our residents. But the issue needs to be revisited, and I think, however this joint meeting today is good, it's not substitute for Grenfell Scrutiny Committee, and I would recommend for us, for the sake of our residents, to reconsider and think about the way to get back that committee. It doesn't matter who chairs it, but we need to get this information sorted so that some of us can at least spend more time to look into the details, how the money has been spent, where the service is required. It will not be a substitute for the kind of meeting we have today, Chair. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Yes, I have a question for the officers, and considering what a vast subject matter this is, the Grenfell expenditure, is there another way to do it? Because I hear what people are saying, and here we are looking at the whole thing in the round, and from a financial sense, it makes sense. So I'm just asking Calum or any of the other officers, is this the best way to look at it, or do you have any other suggestions?
Thank you, Councillor. If you mean how we've laid out the finances in the financial report, I think building on some of the questions of the committee previously, I think we have to be clear that the financial paper predominantly, because that was what was requested, looked at from sort of 2017 onwards, and there's only really information about the Grenfell recovery strategy and spend in the appendices, and that was the design of the service, because we were thinking about what was happening in the early days, whereas the other paper is explicitly only about the Grenfell recovery strategy. So I can appreciate that coming to these two papers at the same time, we are sort of linking spend and a focus on things that happened up till 2019 and then spend that happened after 2019. So I think the suggestions that have been put forwards by the wider committee in terms of thinking about how we can better show and link impact and activity in each year with finance would probably give you a clearer sense of the value and effectiveness of the programme. And I hope that would go some way. And I guess the only other thing that we think about sometimes is if as committees or as a committee you wanted us to focus on a specific part of the programme, that also might be more digestible, because I do appreciate that in order to convey a detailed information, which is what we're normally asked to do, they do end up as quite lengthy reports, and I can appreciate that one might get lost in the detail, and that's totally not our intention.
Thank you. Follow-up question, Councillor Evans.
Yes, thank you very much. I found the reports very informative. Will we be able to see, when you do evaluate the different programs, which ones you will be carrying forward in terms of the general community? Because I think that would be very helpful and would also show value for money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of the programme for the wider community is split up into different sections, and parts of that we have recently, since the publication of the resourcing framework, which was the first appendix here, we have spent time consulting with the community, understanding what was important to them, and we have refined those services already. And really now what we have to try and show through the future years is how well we have been able to deliver on the feedback that we've had from the community, and hopefully if it makes a difference in terms of how people experience and receive those services. What we've tried to learn lessons from in this next part of the programme is, although we've committed contracts with certain providers over a number of years, we have an annual essentially grant agreement process, which gives us flexibility and the ability to make sure that we're listening and learning and making use of the information that we're producing in these committees, rather than it just be a paper exercise, if you like. The other parts of the community programme, I think, are more organic in their design, and they should be able to, and here I'm thinking about the refreshed Grenfell Projects Fund, or the Housing Allocations Programme, or the Housing Legacy Fund, which we've really tried to make sure at the heart of all of those different things is sort of the resident voice encapsulated through some form of steering group or some form of sort of reference group that's really allowing us to drive and listen to the feedback that we've had, and hone and improve the services. So, I think what we've seen come through with the Grenfell Projects Fund in its embryonic form as it's coming in round 2 is a lot of change in terms of how it was done the first time. And I think we have to be thankful to residents' involvement and councillor sort of feedback in terms of making sure that we're learning and adapting.
Thank you very much. It's really helpful, Calum.
Any questions, David?
Callum, you say on Appendix 1, page 21, that the Directorate had an average of 69% of all costs being staffing costs. What I would find really helpful is if you could break that down a bit, and for example on page 23 for the dedicated service 21-22 budget, to specify for each of those line items, frontline team, support team, commission services and so on, how much relates to staffing, and then on a generic anonymized basis for each of the staff who are employed, a one-paragraph job summary so that we know actually what they're doing. Because that might be part of the key so that we can see what the activities and what the outputs are that staff are employed to do and are actually doing. And that might allay some of the concerns of some that actually we're spending an awful lot of money and we're not sure what we're getting out of it. Would that be possible?
Thank you, Councillor. I found the page that you referenced in the second part of your question in terms of the budgetary breakdown, which is in the finance paper, and I can go through that. But forgive me, I didn't quite follow the section that you were referencing in the first part of the question.
The previous page, number 8, 2/3 of the way down the page, even in this directorate, an average of 69% of all costs are staffing costs.
I found you.
I mean, realistically, in pretty well every company and organisation, the majority of expenditure is staff, broadly defined. And actually, if we know what they're doing, that will tease out some of the problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor.
But it would, for everyone who is employed, either 3 lines or a paragraph, clearly anonymised, what their job descriptions are. Whether they have timesheets or not, I wouldn't know, but actually an internal auditor might actually want to go in and see that the work that they have actually done over a period of a month does actually tie up with what they have been employed to do, so that we can see that there is real output that is consistent with the examples of what has been given in, I think, about page of LCAT and all the other organisations that that I've read, but I can't see what page reference they are, of what they've actually meant to be doing.
So I don't think you can answer that.
You can't answer it, but if you can just note it, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Moving to our last few minutes, last question from Councillor Pascal.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for this meeting. I just wanted to ask a question down a theme which might join the finance with the outcomes and with experience with what we might learn in terms of lessons for the future. We have this £50 million fund which has been spent or is going to be spent over the period of this project. And in parallel to that, the NHS pledged an equal sum. So the first part of the question is as to whether there has been some synergy between the two programmes. Overlap may be the wrong word, but synergy between the two programmes. And an example to pick out of that which might be useful to illustrate in future, if Callum could come back with this, and I raised this in the OSC meeting as well, was that of art therapy, because there have been considerable questions about the effectiveness of that, and also as to whether a lot of people knew about this service being available. Now, there is evidence that I've come across outside this particular committee that there has been work done both within the NHS and also increasingly within schools involving art therapy. So there must be an emerging body of knowledge of the effectiveness of this form of engagement with art therapy and how it helps with dealing with mental stress, mental illness, and building mental fitness and mental resilience within the community. Now, specifically, we're here today to talk about the Grenfell experience of this, but the first part of that is as to whether there has been experience that can be measured, and then further going forward, whether there are lessons that can be learnt on how this can be effective, not only within the bereaved and survivors particular context, but within the next of kin and wider community, but also in terms of us, both the Grenfell community, but the wider community facing the effects of COVID and other stresses on us. So, in other words, is there a measurable effectiveness of what has been done in this particular context, the lessons that can be learnt both across our programme and the NHS, and maybe some of it working together? I know Chelsea and Westminster, for instance, is working in relation to the schools as well as their own cohort. And really that's my question. There's a thread running through, which is perhaps an example of what might interest both OSC and Audit and Transparency.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest that was an even bigger body of work for Callum and his team to get on with, but a very, very useful one. And kind of drilling into the sort of granular details that we want to get to. How are we going to do this going? Where are these answers going to go to? Are they going to come back to both committees? You're going to email them out to both committees? Okay, and we're very fortunate to have Mr. Carver here, who's noting down the sort of action points. He nods, yes. So I think the action points coming out of this joint committee need to go out as soon as we can to everybody to make sure that nothing's been missed, to make sure that this is a useful session and we can take away things from it. Is it a quick question? Okay, quick one.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a learning experience having this joint committee together. What I would like to see as well in terms of clarity and of this report, if we can have like a governance structure plus an outline of all the stakeholders as a starting point for this report. Just to engage all the stakeholders, mapping so we can see as well visually their level of interaction. And that's it. That's all what I am asking. And thanks so much for giving me
I
this
sort of worry about the blurring of the lines, and we're getting ourselves into slightly troubled waters, but then we should be going into those waters. I think we need to sort of reflect on this a bit, and Councillor Rossi and I will chat about this afterwards. Because that one very, very last one, because we got the audit and transparency.
Very quick remark.
Yep.
I just wanted to make the observation that there seems to be appetite to have this discussion again and regularly.
Yeah.
And that we need that end-to-end view on a regular basis for accountability and for engagement with the people who ask questions, as Andrew was saying earlier.
Perfect. And I think that's definitely taken on board, and we need to take it to people with a sort of higher pay grade than Councillor Rossi and myself.
I think you should meet again between now and March or whenever. Okay.
Just some of my takeaways. We've got to get better feedback from the users of this service and the non-users of this service. However we do that, knocking on people's doors, calling them up, we have to get the data in order to be able to assess how we're doing and whether this money is well spent, from an Audit and Transparency Committee in terms of whether this is value for money or could be better spent. That's our starting point. We've got to continue to build trust. David's suggestion of sort of organograms and activities per person and everything like that, I think will help. Everything will help. Then what happens after 2024? Now, scrutiny committees are not allowed to bring up things like that, but we're the Audit and Transparency Committee here, so we can. This is a key risk in my book. What is going to happen after 2024? There's been no provision in the budget for it, and I think it needs to go on to the Audit and Transparency's risk schedule. And then the final thing is financial management and Grenfell partnerships need to sort of dovetail a bit better on reporting and when those reports are going to come out, and the data and the dates on them, so that this will be a more useful session going forward. And I think we all agree we should have another one at some point in the future. I'm really sorry.
I just want to say about accountability.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who's accountable, because there's operational work and the scrutiny, but I don't know who's accountable.
I know.
We could put that on the list, please.
Well, neither do we.
Well, I think
as two committees together, we need to decide how this is going to work.
But strategically.
I know. I get
Can I thank the officers? Can I thank the officers for their great work? And I really appreciate the work that they have been putting in. However, we would like the next meeting if there's some sort of a leadership here, because we cannot scrutinize officers. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for your point, and thank you very much for your praise to the officers. Absolutely, they've put in a lot of work and a lot of effort into here, and certainly the audit and transparency papers you see is a mere fraction of what's gone into this, so thank you to everybody. I'm getting the nod from David Shepherd. And I think 7 o'clock, we need to call an end to the meeting. Seeing as I forgot to say, does anyone have any conflicts of interest, declarations of interest at the beginning of the meeting? No declarations of interest. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for chairing the meeting.
Yeah.